Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Iran leans harder into its nuclear ambitions following the reported death of yet another top commander. Israeli government coalition members take the first steps towards dissolving back towards elections. And the Agriculture Ministry asks us to grow in intolerance for puppy mills. Tensions are mounting higher and higher in the Middle East. Fear of an all-out regional war spreading widely now as another Iranian military official is reportedly struck dead in Syria. And this, of course, just after the assassination of Iran's nuclear program leader. A surprise explosion at the Iraq-Syria border sometime between Saturday and Sunday, now confirmed by local officials to have killed a commander of the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps. Senior IRGC commander Muslim Shadan and several of his entourage killed in his car in an apparent overnight drone strike. And just a day after the assassination in Tehran of Iranian nuclear scientist and military head Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, an attack blamed on Israel and now also on local Iranian opposition groups.
متاسفانه عملیات بسیار پیچیده‌ای بود با کارگیری تجهیزات الکترونیکی رخ داد. هیچ فردی در صحنه حضور نداشت. اما سرنخ‌هایی وجود داره ضمن که اون کسی که این طراحی رو کرده برای ما مکشوفه که کیست، سابقه‌اش چیست. حتما منافقین در این نقش داشتن و حتما عنصر جنایتکار این امر رژیم صهیونیستی است و موساد.
Well, just as in Fakhrizadeh's killing, all eyes are on Israel, which has admitted to hundreds of similar strikes in Syria over the past few years. IDF chief Aviv Kochavi was also even in meetings along the northern border with Syria just ahead of the drone strike, where he repeated vows to act against all Iranian entrenchment and aggression in the region. Iraqi media also later claimed that Shadan's vehicle was carrying weapons across the border from Iraq into Syria when it was struck. But in any case, if the aim of these latest attacks was to deter Iran's military nuclear ambitions, it doesn't seem to be working. The parliament in Tehran advancing a draft bill Tuesday morning that would block future UN inspections of its nuclear facilities. And at the same time, it would oblige the regime to increase its uranium production and enrichment to 20%, which is below nuclear weapons grade, but far higher than the 3.67% enrichment limit imposed by the JCPOA and which is needed for civilian use.
هم سانتریفیوژهای جدید رو نصب بکنیم و کاهش ذخایر که در حال حاضر چیزی در حدود 3800 کیلو ما مواد داریم که حالا قبلا 11 تن داشتیم، یعنی حدود 4 تن تا 11 تن که تفاوت آنچنانی نداره.
Meanwhile, ending the parliament session with a chant of death to Israel and death to America, the bill also gives the remaining signatories of the JCPOA nuclear deal 3 months to lift economic sanctions on their oil and banking industries. Joining us now with more on the assassinations of Iranian officials Mohsen Fakhrizadeh and Muslim Shadan is former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor, Professor Chuck Freilich. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Now, first off, all fingers are pointing at Jerusalem, and many have discussed the likelihood that Fakhrizadeh's was an Israeli assassination. But what about Shadan? How likely was this an Israeli strike?
Well, I don't have any confirmation, of course. But I think it's pretty clear Israel's been waging a so-called campaign between the campaigns for a number of years now, trying to prevent Iran from setting up an offensive base in Syria for operations against Israel. They've been trying to establish air, naval, and ground bases. And this is something which Israel cannot allow to happen. And in some ways, it's an even greater threat than the nuclear one, in the sense that it's much shorter term. The nuclear threat, we still have a while. This one, we can't afford to wait very long with.
Well, so you know, what does this say for, what do these recent strikes really say about maybe the balance of power in the Middle East and how that's shifting? Because these latest strikes, if nothing else, are, you know, a pretty big black spot on Iran's security.
They certainly are. And there have been a series of attacks in Iran itself, some attributed to Israel, some maybe not. In any event, it demonstrates the fact that Iran is very, very vulnerable to outside intervention. But Iran is a regional power, and playing with it is rather dangerous. I think that Iran is the first adversary we've ever faced, which is so powerful, so sophisticated, and so far away that we probably cannot defeat it. We can't win in a confrontation with Iran. We can defend ourselves quite successfully, and I sleep quite well at night, but we can't defeat Iran. And while there are some things that we must do, such as taking measures to prevent their entrenchment in Syria and to prevent the continuation of the nuclear program, at the same time, what we should be trying to do is lower tensions with Iran and coordinate policy with the incoming Biden administration.
All right, well, so, how do you see that coordination, especially between the Biden administration and Iran? How do you see that showing up or taking shape, especially as we've just covered the fact that the Iranian parliament is now hardlining its nuclear ambitions?
Well, it's not surprising that they're taking aggressive measures following the killing of Fakhrizadeh. We wouldn't expect any less, and I hope that they won't respond militarily against Israel, which they may still do. And that's, of course, also something that had to be taken account by whoever launched the attack. But in terms of the consultations, the very close dialogue that I think should be underway with the incoming administration, well, the targeted killing of Fakhrizadeh, if we're behind it, was not a move that was conducive to that. And maybe that outweighs considerably whatever limited tactical advantage was gained by taking one person out of the picture is as important as he is.
Wow. All right. Well, it'll be really interesting to see if this is truly a Hydra situation, as you're kind of alluding to. Professor Freilich, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Moving on, as if Israel didn't have enough on its plate, it seems an election may soon be added. A bill to dissolve the Knesset is now gaining support ahead of its scheduled vote on Wednesday. Nittany Manson reporting.
A bombshell announcement. Reports claiming that Defense Minister and alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz of the Blue and White Party is expected to give his support for the dissolving of the Knesset. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for his part, saying that now is not the time for politics.
ביום רביעי האופוזיציה תנסה לגרור את מדינת ישראל לבחירות מיותרות. הליכוד יצביע נגד בחירות ובעד אחדות. אחדות כדי שנביא חיסונים לכל אזרחי ישראל. אחדות כדי שנמשיך עד מתן החיסונים להיאבק בנחישות בקורונה. אחדות כדי שנגיש עוד סיוע כלכלי לעסקים, לעצמאים, לאזרחים. אחדות כדי שנמשיך לשמור על הביטחון, ואחדות כדי שנחתום על עוד הסכמי שלום. אזרחי ישראל זקוקים לממשלה שפועלת לא למען בחירות, לא למען פוליטיקה, אלא למענם, למען כל אזרחי ישראל, בלי יוצא מן הכלל.
Still, Netanyahu's co-premier Benny Gantz has reportedly reached the last straw, giving up any chance of becoming prime minister under his rotation agreement in favor of taking Israelis back to elections for the fourth time in 2 years, and during a pandemic. The defense minister adding that the public is done with buying Netanyahu's lies, and that a national budget would not have been an issue had the prime minister not been preoccupied with trial for corruption. Meanwhile, drawing lines in the sand, Labour Party leaders also saying that they'll be backing the planned dissolution. As for the results of a possible election, despite the government infighting and pending corruption trial, new polls show that the Prime Minister's Likud party would likely drop a couple seats but remain the largest party overall. Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party, on the other hand, is not doing so well following its public division from the Yesh Atid and Telem factions, now expected to drop from 14 to 9 seats in government. Netanyahu's latest competition then coming from Naftali Bennett and his opposition Yamina party, which is expected to pick up 20 mandates.
So are we heading to elections again for the fourth time in 2 years during a pandemic? And if so, how do we expect it to go down? Joining me to discuss, we have political strategist and director of English operations for the Yamina Party, Jeremy Salton, and former Likud Knesset member and president of the Likud Party Supreme Court, Michael Kleiner. Now, Michael, I'm going to start with you. The big question first, are we heading for elections?
Maybe. I hope not. It will be very damages for the Israeli economy and not having a budget, being in the middle of a crisis which is very sensitive. You know, at January, we have to start a new budget year. Banks will start to ask for mortgages payment that were delayed. People will feel that the time they get money without work, compensation, they know it's not unlimited resources. And we need a government to deal, and the leaders of the country, to deal with running the crisis and not with running an election. It is really a disaster, unexplainable, but most members of Knesset don't want it. The leaders of the parties don't want the election. Most of the members of Knesset don't want it. But sometimes, you know, events are stronger than the wishes of the people who caused those events.
All right, well, Jeremy, you know, same question, I guess, to you. Michael is saying right now that most leaders don't actually want that, or members of Knesset, rather, at least don't want another election. Would you agree? Where does Naftali Bennett sit on this?
I think a majority of the Knesset members do want to see an election. If they didn't, we wouldn't be seeing a vote in which it appears the majority of the Knesset members are going to vote to lose their jobs, right?
How many members of Likud or Blue and White really want an election, or the religious party?
You know, if we're looking at the polls, both Likud and Blue and White are looking to lose about 25%, if not more, of the seats that they have right now. Yet what they're doing is...
Yamina has only 5 members of Knesset. Maybe they want election.
Well, you know, we're not the ones who decided to table the vote for tomorrow. That was decided by, of course, Yair Lapid. We already know that there are members within the coalition, such as the Labor Party, who've already said that they are going to vote for it. It seems very clear, based on the behavior yesterday as well as today, that Blue and White is going to go ahead and support it. And again, if I'm looking at the fact that we don't have a state budget, that just proves that Netanyahu has never really been interested in producing a state budget, and that he's always wanted elections. Now, I understand it's his position, it's the Likud position, to go ahead and throw the blame of this election on Blue and White, and they're able to go ahead and say, listen, we would have done the rotation agreement, we would have made Gantz prime minister, but, oh, they're the ones that voted to disperse the Knesset, and Netanyahu can go on his white horse and say, I voted against it. But let's be honest, if there was a budget being presented, then we would not be in the position that we are right now. In fact, I remember, Michael, when the two of us were sitting together on a different station during the inauguration of this government, I foresaw this particular situation, which I noticed within the coalition agreement, the whole that said that in the case of a budget that Netanyahu has an exit clause and that he would be able to go ahead and call an early election. So Netanyahu wants an election in June, which would mean going ahead and crashing it in March. Instead, Gantz is saying that let's go ahead and let's do it earlier. I don't understand why we should go ahead and wait and have an election during Netanyahu's timetable. Go ahead, produce a budget. If you're not going to produce a budget, then let's just go ahead and get on with this instead of delaying the inevitable.
I want to go back to you, Michael, now, because you kind of touched on something earlier. You know, do you believe that an election, obviously, you don't believe that that's what's best for the country right now. Can you describe a little bit more why that is and how we might avoid it?
No, if all the people in the Knesset will realize that actually they are the one who takes the decision, they are the one who will determine whether there will be an election or not, they may find a way how to continue this government. Blue and White doesn't need nothing good is waiting for them. They do not need the election. and I believe they can come to a kind of understanding how to pass a budget, because if there's one additional thing to elections the country doesn't need, it doesn't need a situation that the economy is operating without a budget. We need a budget, we need legislation, we need solutions for the people who are unemployed, we need solutions for training people for new jobs after they finish their unemployment time. Not all of them will be able to return to their previous jobs. And all this has to be done by a government that is working 24 hours a day. Netanyahu has an agreement with Blue and White. I believe he should fulfill the agreement, not find a way out. There's nothing that he knows now about the partners he didn't know when he signed the agreement. So if there is a rotation, there will be a rotation. The majority of the government will run it anyway. And I hope that people will come to their senses, and members of Knesset and ministers and Likud will also express their views. As I said before, a big majority of the members of the Knesset don't want the election. If there would have been held a secret ballot in the Knesset, whether they want election or not, I guess maybe between 90 and 100 people in a secret ballot would have voted against election.
Well, I'd love to see that vote as opposed to the public vote, to see if there really is any sort of separation.
What do you think? What do you think? There will be a difference?
I think that it would be very, very, very fascinating to see if there is a difference. In fact, Michael Kleiner, Jeremy Selton, thank you so much for being with us.
Of course.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now, political issues aside, coronavirus is still spreading, remaining health restrictions failing to prevent the renewed rise in infections. With the positivity rate still holding stable at about 2.2%, overnight cases have risen again by over 1,200 for the first time since mid-October. Active cases numbering over 10,550 and counting, with serious and ventilated cases similarly rising, and the death toll now at 2,867. Rather than close things back down as previously threatened, however, the coronavirus cabinet has instead decided to revise their pilot program for letting malls stay open. Specifically, the new maximum occupancy for malls and large stores has been reduced to one person for every 15 square meters. Then, for the smaller stores in the mall, occupancy will be restricted to just one person for every 7 square meters, up to 10 people maximum. And already banned public or commercial locations in the mall, like movie theaters, are not counted in the calculations.
אסור להיכנס כאן לאווירת סוף קורונה ואווירת סוף קורס. אנחנו מתקדמים, אנחנו מביאים את זה, אבל אני צריך עדיין את שיתוף הפעולה של הציבור לצד מאמצי האכיפה הממוקדים שלנו כדי לשלוט במחלה. ולכן אנחנו נעשה מה שצריך כדי לעשות את זה. אנחנו מצליחים יותר מרוב מדינות העולם, אבל יש לנו מאמצים.
In other news, talk about a mess plagued by delays and logistical issues. The planned Tel Aviv metro and light rail have been for years hanging like a dark cloud over the country. But now, despite over a decade of discussions, broken promises, and 500 million shekels spent, the whole plan might be nixed. Transport Minister Miri Regev examining just how worth it is to continue. Well, here with us now to talk brass tacks is Chen Herzog, economist for BDO Consulting. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello.
All right, so, what are the problems, really, first of all, with the metro plan?
Well, the problem is that it appears to be very costly project, and it is very costly. But of course, you have to weigh what would be the alternative. And I think for the Israeli economy, the alternative of not building the metro and continuing to suffer from the congestion would be more expensive.
Not to mention that it would be terribly embarrassing after a decade plus of promising this metro. But, so did they not know the costs ahead of time? It's pretty regular to go over budget from time to time on big projects like this, but how over are we talking?
Okay, so the light rail project, the light rail project in Tel Aviv indeed had the cost overrun and time overrun, but I think it will begin operating at the end of next year. And the question now is whether to expand the light rail or the metro system beyond Tel Aviv to the entire metropolitan area. And this is the debate now. So the question is, do we form a metro system that connects the entire metropolitan area of Tel Aviv, or do we limit a small a light rail system only in the city of Tel Aviv.
Well, and I think that question really boils down to, what is the point really to have a light rail that is really only just within Tel Aviv? Because it's not going to address the traffic in and out of the city every day or any of the...
Yeah, it's not only that. You have to remember there are three very unique characteristics of the Israeli economy. Our population is growing, so the traffic only gets worse. Every 5 years, we have 1 million more people here. They have to get to work. They have to travel. So that's one characteristic we have. The second, to begin with, we're a very highly dense city or country, more highly density with higher density than many other Western countries. And to begin with, we have very low level of infrastructure. So we must fill this gap. And yes, it is costly, but you have to remember that the national cost of the congestion to the Israeli economy today is 35 billion shekels every year. And within a decade or two, it will be twice or three times as high if we don't build metro system.
All right. So again, what are the obstacles really standing in our way between getting this and?
So the obstacle is, of course, budget and priorities. And the Ministry of Transportation said yes, but we also need to build a railway to the remote areas in the south and in the north. It's true, but
which we do, yeah.
Well, we do. Yeah, we have a lot of infrastructure gaps to do, but it can't be one on cost of the other, and we have to do both. And I think another obstacle is some people believe in some kinds of miracles. We have new technology. We'll have smart mobility. You have to remember all these are not a substitute to mass transit. Uber doesn't reduce congestion.
Sure.
Uber maybe saves parking spot, but at the end of the day, it's one person per car. And the only way to reduce and to solve this problem is mass transit is a metro project.
All right, well, I think I speak for millions of Israelis when I say we've been waiting for this Tel Aviv metro for a long time, so I hope it comes about. Chen, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, our final story this evening is one that's close to my heart, and if you've been regularly watching our tubing segment, then you may already know what it's about. I'm speaking, of course, about illegal puppy mills and the desperate need to disband them. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
Small cages, old dog food and water strewn about, living in their own make, neglected in a dark warehouse. These are the horrendous conditions described by the Ministry of Agriculture and Israel Police after they raided and rescued 90 dogs, including pregnant female dogs in severe conditions, in northern Israel. The ministry and police now again urging Israelis to adopt from public pounds and verified rescue centers rather than purchase from these so-called puppy mills. Investigators confirming that these conditions are indeed the product of an illegal puppy mill. The man behind it, a 60-year-old Haifa resident who is planning to breed and upcharge various breeds of dogs. The Agricultural Ministry already taking steps in pursuing legal action, first by closing down the mill, but veterinarian officials being told that the dogs were still being sold even after legal steps were taken, and all the while violating numerous government violations regarding the dog's health. Puppy mills are a growing concern throughout the country and have led to the South's increasing number of feral dogs, who are both sick and violent, causing harm to livestock and wildlife as well as humans. The ministry also calling on the public to be especially aware when meaning to purchase small dogs, and no matter what, to make sure the dog being adopted or purchased is tested for diseases and is not from an unknown origin. This is just one of several recent cases of illegal breeding and selling in Israel's north, and according to the Ministry of Agriculture, a very grave scenario. The dogs have all been transferred and are rehabilitating safely at MOA facilities. If you have any information or claims to make of possible animal abuse, please report them to the ministry's 24/7 hotline at the bottom of the screen. Hannah Rifkin, ILTV.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. It's looking pretty stable for tonight and tomorrow with clear to partly cloudy skies overhead and lows tonight of 51 Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect another drop in the temperatures for a daily high of about 69 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius. And now before we go, of course, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Oh, it's not a dog. It's just a cat. Maybe acting like one? No, not really. No, why is he so mad at everybody? Protecting the curb, I guess. All right, well, that's his curb, so don't walk there. And that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.3 shekels to the American dollar and 2.55 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.